Every time our athletes walk into this weight room, they're going to be pushed to the max.
Let's go! Let's go!
The barbell hasn't changed in over 100 years. I can take a 25-pound plate and we'll go out on the turf and I'll have you hating life. We talk about straining your gut, pushing past that comfort level. I want a lot of energy. What better breeding ground is there for being a success in life than the weight room?
Hey guys, welcome back to Iron Game Chalk Talk. I'm your host, McKeefery, and this is episode number 247. I want to thank you guys for listening each week. Truly appreciate those of you that like, share, comment. Just helps me continue to highlight the fantastic people we have in our profession doing great things. Also want to thank our sponsors, and specifically Intech for sponsoring this episode for free. I only partner with companies that I believe in, products that I believe in, and people that I believe in. And Intech, is a fantastic company that got great products, and the people behind it are even better. So if you're in the market, I'd encourage you to reach out to them. If not, just tell them thank you the next time you see them for being a part of Iron Game Chalk Talk. This week, I'm joined by Phil Daru. He's the head physical preparation coach at America Top Team. He's the director of Fight Science Institute, has a podcast, has several ebooks out, just a guy doing some phenomenal things. He's got, he's trained 6+ world champions. Just truly appreciate you coming on the show and sharing, man.
Oh man, thanks for having me. This is like I said, it's one of the dream come trues of my career right now, so I'm happy about it.
No, thanks, man. Well, we talked a little bit about your background. I mean, you've done a little bit of all. You played college football, were a professional fighter. You opened your own gym. You've done a little bit of everything. Now, which one of those experiences, between America's Top Team to when you first got into this profession, really kind of defines you as a coach, where you feel like you grew into the coach you are today?
I think when I first got the job at American Top Team around maybe 4 years ago at this point, where I had to actually, pretty much cause audibles, throw audibles in every time I come into the gym, whereas that, you're training multiple different, athletes at the same time. A lot of these fighters have fights on different times. There are a lot of them are at different weight classes. Some of them are females, males, things like that. Some of them have different experiences in the weight room. So, and then also on top of that, their schedules are crazy. They're training multiple times throughout the day. They have injuries, they have bumps and bruises and things like that. So I developed a system that made sense for, the individual, as going further from a mixed martial arts standpoint. But I've always had to call audibles or auto-regulate, each and every day due to the specific demands that they're put upon in their sport, man. Every time they come in, it's either something, so I have to make sure that I'm physically ready to make sure that we are getting them performing at their peak, but also progressing them and not, causing any more damage in a sense. So that was pretty much what I had to do. And now that I've learned how to do that pretty efficiently, I think it's just, sky's the limit from here.
Yeah, I think you might have already alluded to it a little bit, but you don't get to America's Top Team without making some mistakes along the way. I mean, what was one of the biggest mistakes you made and how you learned from it?
I think about, in the beginning, and I've started this, I've been doing this since I was 19. I think a lot of it was just trying to overwork my athletes and just trying to beat them into the ground, man, and getting them physically exhausted and making them feel like they can't do any more. And that was maybe it was an ego thing, maybe because I was young and I was training a lot of guys that were older and a lot of girls that were older. But I think that now I have more of a systematic approach to the situation, and then understanding aerobic demands and understanding fatigue management. And that was one thing that I see this still with a lot of these young coaches today, is they try to make a name for themselves, or they try to show that they know, more, or they just want to be kind of not feared, but respected. And They end up overtraining their athletes. And that's something that we cannot do. Hard training is smart training, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're slowly progressing them and not beating them to the ground. And with fighters in general, man, they're already self-driven. Yeah. So I have to pull my guys back more than anything. And a lot of the times they want to do more, and I know they're not, quote unquote soft, but at the same time, you have to make sure that it's steadily a progression without, beating them to the ground, because at the end of the day, they need to be able to do all of their skills training. And if they're, overtired or they're overreaching or overtraining, that's going to be, a negative side effect that we can't have, especially going into camp. So,
right. Well, that's a great point. I think that's maybe one of the biggest questions I have about mixed martial arts. I've had, I was a high school wrestler. My son's a really good wrestler. Been around the sport for a long time. And you're right. Most of them, wrestlers, MMA, martial artists in general, they're high. They like to be dropped into grease. I mean, it's not a great workout unless they're on the mat, dead to the world. How do you walk that balance of helping them realize the difference between what is systematic and progressive versus feeling like they're getting just a butt kicking every time they walk into the gym?
Yeah, so this is like a constant struggle of mine, and this is where teaching comes into play when you're a coach. You have to educate your fighters or your athletes on proper progressions and understanding that these things come into play at certain points in times where out of camp I would usually try to make sure that we're gaining obviously a general fitness base, working on work capacity, full work capacity. But once camp starts, and that's usually around 8 weeks out, we're trying to make sure that we're maintaining what we've had as far as fitness goes, and it also is obviously subjective to the individual, but we're trying to maintain and gain strength. We're trying to gain joint integrity. We're trying to gain anaerobic capacity. With that being said, everything has to be systematically structured. If not, then you're kind of just throwing stuff at the wall trying to make it stick, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, I try to educate my guys on, the importance of having a schedule and having, a plan. If you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. So, from that perspective, and then also seeing the results in their fights and seeing the results in their skills training. Once they feel that they are more stable, they're more explosive, they have, a better wind capacity, their VO2 is high, they're not getting tired in wrestling practice. Those things, action statistical data, I should say, that's what I like to call it, actually being able to physically see it from their perspective, that helps when they can buy into the situation.
Yeah.
And when they, and you get that, I get that a lot, especially with the old school guys, the wrestlers. I got a lot of guys from like Russia and more independently from Dagestan, where these guys train so hard on a constant basis, and that's all they know, But when I can sit down and actually show them why we are doing the things we are doing, because it's going to progress them and make them physically able to do what they need to do come fight night, and that's the only important time that you really need to be at your highest,
right? Then
they're more apt to buying into the whole entire situation. So that's what I'm doing pretty much on a constant basis.
How are you tracking progress for these athletes? I mean, is there an evaluation process at the beginning and then you're tracking measurables throughout? You mentioned VO2 max, but are you doing any kind of 1-rep testing or anything along those lines to show progress from year to year?
Yeah, so in the beginning of camp, usually around, I would say about 9 weeks out, I take the guys over to Nova Southeastern University with a colleague of mine, Corey Peacock, and we do a full, physiological assessment where we'll run a DEXA scan on them to see where their body fat lies. This will help just in general, just to see exactly how much muscle they have, how much body fat, per se. And then it helps with the weight cut too. Right. Then from there, we'll do an explosive power test. So they'll be on the jump mat. We'll see where their lower body explosive power lies. Then we'll do a lactate threshold test just to see exactly how far we can push the pace. And then a standard VO2 max test. Now, this usually doesn't – a lot of people will say that this doesn't correlate or, transfer over into MMA just because they're not doing their sport. They're just running on a treadmill. Yeah. But the most important thing that I'm trying to see exactly what macronutrients are we actually utilizing? Are we utilizing fats? Are we using carbohydrates? And then more importantly, I want to see exactly where the recovery rate lies. So if they can bring down their heart rate around 40 to 50 beats per minute within that minute, I know that they'll be physically capable of going hard the next round when they get that break in between rounds. Yeah. I train a female fighter by the name of Joanna Jedrzejczyk. She was the strawweight world champion. She has a fight this weekend. This lady has probably the best recovery rate I've ever seen in any individual, that any fighter that I've ever had. And I've trained over 100 fighters in my time. I've literally seen her get her heart rate up to 172 and then within a minute drop it back down to about 119, 120. So we know in between rounds she's ready to go. As long as she can push the pace, and we can push her, from a sports specific perspective, in the fight, if it's the last 10 seconds, she can go all out, because we know the next round she's ready to go 100% again. Yeah. And that's what I take out of that whole assessment.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the key, right? I mean, you got to find what works for your athletes and gives you the information that you're able to go back and tweak programs based off of that, especially with fighters where it is kind of one-on-one, and you're making it real specific to them. When you're dealing with those athletes, that have, the fight game, one of the things that I love about the fight game is that they're not afraid to go and find the experts when it comes to striking or grappling or whatever it is. Now it's getting better with America's Top Team and some of the other teams that you mentioned in terms of creating that team environment. But how do you prevent, them kind of always looking for the grass is greener, that they're looking from a performance standpoint or from a striking standpoint, where they're wanting to, it's this kind of cherry picking services approach?
I mean, it's funny because fighters they're really hard to judge. They are skewed in so many different directions on who's better, who's best, what's the new thing out, or they have a mentality of like that old school mentality where I've been doing this for years and it's only worked and I'm going to keep on doing it until it doesn't work anymore. Right. But they got to understand that the times are adapting, or you have to adapt to the times, and we are, ever evolving in this sport. For now, like maybe prior to this, within 3 years, maybe 5 years ago, there was no strength and conditioning coaches for mixed martial arts. I think the first guy to do it was Joel Jamieson, and from there, now it's evolved into, more of a hot commodity in a sense. And now we have several guys in the industry now that are working with high level fighters, when we're talking about UFC, Bellator, the main promotions. And, it's to stop these guys. I guess the main thing is just to get them to see results, and also without any exception, making sure that you are developing a relationship with these fighters and making them trust in your program and trust in yourself. And that's where the art of coaching comes into play, I believe. If you don't connect with your fighter or your athlete in that way, then there's no real reason that they're going to, put their all out energy into what you have for them. Yeah. So we got to make sure that we are developing a bond, a relationship with our fighters. And you can do that by making sure you go the extra mile, by asking them how are they feeling on a daily basis, sending them a text, asking them about their family, things like that. Get almost personal with them, to an extent, but, making sure that they understand that you are not only there to collect a paycheck, you're there to help them succeed. Sure. And, from there, they'll stick with you. The loyalty will run deep as long as you put out the extra effort and you actually become a coach and a mentor to these people. Right. And once that happens, then you'll get, 120% by all these guys, because that's just how they are as individuals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think with, fighters, I mean, at least the ones that I've been around have, they're extremely loyal to those that are loyal to them. Yeah. But their emotions can run the gamut, man. This is somebody that can be in front of thousands of people punching each other in the face and be fine, but then they can also be rock bottom the very next day. How do you within a training session? What are some takeaways, some tactics that you use to make sure that that they come in with the right mindset, even on those days where they're maybe in those lows?
Well, it begins with understanding and knowing the athlete. I think that becomes something that you have to do on a constant basis. Yeah. But in the beginning processes of when you work with them, find out what actually drives them. Do your research, do your homework, see exactly how long they've been in the game. How long have they been fighting? Why are they fighting? Is it something that's in their DNA? Or is it that they were an athlete that just got, sucked into the situation? Yeah. So there's two types of fighters out there. You might have a Dustin Poirier, who I work with, who's been born to fight. That's all he knows. He dropped out of school at 9th grade, and all he knows is fighting. Yeah. So for me, he wants to be a champion. So with that point, when he's coming in a little tired, a little, dragging and not really want to do things, I just remind him why he's here.
Yeah.
What's your why? Why are you here? What do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? Do you want to be the best in the world? Are you the best in the world? And then from there, that kind of just sparks them to do what they need to do. And then you got other guys that, that you need to be a little bit more, I guess, coddling, and trying to make sure that they're not getting too overtrained in a sense where, you're not always yelling at them. A lot of the guys don't really do well with the yelling. And
Right.
like when I was in college, what got me going was my strength conditioning coach or my skill specific coach yelling in my face, grabbing my face mask and screaming and spitting in my face. But that made me do more. That gave me my, my drive, so, but it just depends on the person. Everybody's with this fight game. Fighters are different. Everybody's different in this sense. Some are dopamine dependent. Some are acetylcholine dependent. And we have to figure out exactly what type of style are they. And once we figure that out, then we can go ahead and drive them in the right directions.
With specifically a sport like MMA where it's very much weight dependent, weight class dependent and all those types of things. I mean, that adds a whole new wrinkle into the physical preparation piece. Yeah. Where you got athletes that that sit at their weight for most of the year, or you got ones that can drop up to 10, 15 kilos to get to their weight. How do you go about integrating that process into trying to maintain that lean body mass and that strength that you've worked hard in the off season to develop?
Yeah. So in the beginning, before camp, like I said, we always want to develop a solid strength and aerobic base. And to be honest, I want my fighters sitting around 12 to 15% out, when they start camp. And that's from scale weight. So, if a guy fights at 170 and he usually walks around I want him walking around at no more than 198. And then from there, we can just develop, a good solid joint integrity, build some hypertrophy, but obviously, not so deep into camp. This is more on the far side of camp where we're talking about 9 to 8 weeks out. We develop, some hypertrophy there so we can potentiate into strength. And then from there, we keep the volume relatively high and then the intensity. And obviously we just basically going on a block periodization model, so for instance, let's say phase 1 would be 8 to 5 weeks out. We're working more on, strength endurance. And what I mean by strength endurance, we're talking about rep ranges in 5, 6, maybe even 7 or 8 ranges, and then we'll work into some anaerobic capacity. So we'll be doing some sprint intervals, making sure that we're not trying to pull the organism in 2 different directions during each training session, because we're trying to develop that stimulus adaptation per, bioenergetic demand. So what we do there is from 8 to 5 weeks out, we'll work on that. Then I'll start to introduce more plyometrics, more explosive power going into the fourth and phase 2, pretty much 4 to 2 weeks out. The 5th week, I usually do a structured deload just to get their body, to decay fatigue and try to get that super compensation on that 4th week, and usually that's when the skills practice starts to pick up very heavily, and skills, technical and tactical training starts to be the more of the priority. So we start to decrease the frequency and the volume around that time of 4 weeks out, which is around phase 2. And from then on, it's just basically maintaining a solid body mass. And they should be about 6 weeks out. They should be where they want to be at, after they rehydrate from their weight cut. And then, 4, 3, 2 weeks out. 2 weeks out, you're looking at, we're looking at a taper there. And then the week out, they're deloading, right? We're getting ready for the fight, either weight cutting, if they have a huge weight cut, or they're just drilling and trying to decrease as much cortisol as possible. So, as far as it all depends on where their lean body mass is in the beginning of camp. And that's where the assessment comes into play. A lot of the guys, I want my guys to be highly muscled. I don't want them to be, too out of shape. Obviously the more muscle they have, the more easily the weight cut will be. Water is held into the muscle tissue. So I don't really mind that. As far as, them being a fast twitch or a slow twitch fiber guy will be dependent upon what they do in the, in the training program. So if you got a guy named like Tyron Woodley, who's highly fast twitch, who could play in the NFL if he really wanted to, we're going to be working more towards an aerobic base and trying to build and maybe even transfer over some fast twitch to slow twitch.
Yeah.
So for him, I don't really, a lot of people say that, muscle requires a whole lot of oxygen and things like that. Well, if you build an aerobic base with the muscle that you already had, you should be able to transfer over, into a high, performance aspect when it comes to this sport. Now, you also have to make sure that you're maintaining your energy output, just like Tyron does in his fights. A lot of people get mad because there's not a whole lot of volume. Well, if you're highly fast twitch, you don't have a whole lot of volume to put out. So you have to make sure that you're structuring you have to make sure that you're structuring your game plan around your fiber types. People really don't understand that.
No, I agree with you. I want to switch gears just a little bit here. I mean, you're training, high level athletes every single day, but then you're also finding ways to give back to the community and help grow a sport that seems like every year it grows 10 years in development. It's really making high gains, really, really quick. But you're turning around and you got Fight Science Institute, you're putting out some ebooks, you got a podcast. Why put yourself through all that extra work right now?
I'm going to tell you, I've always wanted to create content that younger coaches can build off of. When I was coming up, there was no content like this for me. I didn't have the abilities to actually even do, even just, a standard internship. It wasn't in my place. I had to like we said before off air, I had to jump right into the situation. I had to jump right into coaching because I needed to feed my family. Yep. And so from that point, I want to give back to a situation that I didn't really have, So to do these podcasts, to do articles, to do ebooks, things like that, I want to educate the public on this sport because this sport is so highly misunderstood in a lot of ways. So to me, to give back, it makes me feel good, and it kind of sets up, a history of, what I've done in this industry, and this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I might as well put my all into it and not just settle for one thing. I've never been somebody who wants to be, to be stagnant or be complacent. So for me, I'm constantly trying to grow, and I'm constantly trying to put out content to help other people, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for as coaches, to help other people. So that's pretty much why it drives me.
Yeah, I mean, you can, and everybody listening, you can get to a lot of that at darustrong.com. But I agree with you in that, I think even, in the fight game, it's probably last 10 years, maybe even last 5 years, really, where a majority of the content has come from. But in the strength game in general, it's only about a 60-year-old profession.
Yeah.
So you think about, law or medicine or in these other disciplines, and we have an obligation as coaches, I think, to put out material to help chronicle our development. 100 years from now, 200 years from now, they're going to be looking back to this time about like what started things, and I think we have an obligation. And so I really appreciate that and what you're doing there. We end the show, man, with some resources here. Give us the best piece of coaching advice you ever received.
So the best piece of coaching advice would have to be always learn and improve. Each and every day, try to find something that's actually going to benefit you and progress you in your career, in your daily lifestyle, whatever the case may be. Always find something that you can improve upon.
I absolutely. Give us a book, app, and website recommendation.
So for my book, it's going to be Scientific Principles of Strength Training by Renaissance Periodization, Mike Israetel, Chad Wesley Smith. I think that really dives deep into a good detailed approach on how to actually properly periodize a training program, and especially I would say strength athletes in general. This is definitely a good book. As far as the website goes, kabuki.ms. It's Kabuki Strength's website. That's Chris Duffin's website. They have a lot of good content for corrective exercises.
Yeah.
I work closely with Chris. I'm an ambassador of their products, and I do I highly prefer them, as far as, getting out there and seeing that website. And then for app, I got to go with Audible. Now, Audible, I drive 90 minutes every other day to American Top Team. So for me, for self-education, for, self-growth, I like to get on Audible. I'm actually listening to a book called Sapiens right now. So it's going to be good. I'm almost halfway through there, but I have a whole library on Audible. So if you want to if you don't have time to physically read, because you know how coaches are, coach, like we're constantly on the grind. So, if I can get a couple of times throughout the day listening to either a podcast, Ron McKeefery's podcast, like I always do, like I've always have done, and then some audiobooks, I'm good to go.
Yeah, I'm an Audible guy as well. I've worked up now to where I listen to things at 2.0 speed.
Yeah.
And then if I like it, I go and I buy the book and I go deeper on it.
That's awesome.
A lot of them are there's so many of them are saying the same things anymore, but
yeah.
But if you find a good one, man, a good book now is important.
For sure, definitely.
Well, man, like I said, I really respect anybody that is willing to put themselves out there to give back to the community in any way. And here you are, you're doing things at an extremely high level. We're working with with very demanding and athletes that are going to take your time, both on and off the mat. But yet you're speaking, you're writing, you're producing resources and those types of things, and doing it at a relatively young age. And so, man, I just my hats off to you. Really like what you're doing. Appreciate you giving back to the community and more specifically coming on the show and sharing with everybody.
And without a doubt, man, I really appreciate it. Like I said, I've been listening to your podcast for years now, so it's awesome to finally get on here and talk to you and talk shop.
That's it for this episode of Iron Game Chalk Talk. Thanks to this week's guest as well as our sponsors for bringing this episode to you for free. Make sure to check out ronmckeefery.com, where you can join our mailing list, find the show notes, including all the links and resources mentioned, and information about Coach McKeefery's other products. While you are there, please join Coach McKeefery in the comments section thanking our guest for sharing. If you haven't subscribed to Iron Game Chalk Talk on YouTube or iTunes yet, make sure to do so. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome. Coach McKeefery can be found on Twitter at @RMcKeefery, on Facebook and YouTube at /Ron.McKeefery. That's it for this week. Be sure to check back next week for another great episode of Iron Game Chalk Talk.